freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 227 of Gun Freedom Radio, where we engage, we educate, and we inform. We are brought to you by azfirearms.com, your nationwide hometown gun shop. I am one of your hosts, Cheryl Todd.
And I'm the other guy, Dan Todd. Our guest today is, I forgot the theme.
Oh, okay.
The gun code.
The gun code.
And our guest today is Ashley Hlebinsky.
Yes, and we are laughing because I may or may not have edited out a whole lot of silliness. So just hang with us. We probably have the giggles now. Ashley is one of the nation's foremost authorities on firearms history. Recently, she served as both curator of the Cody Firearms Museum, the CFM, and project director for the museum's multi-million-dollar renovation that reopened in July of 2019. Thank goodness that was before COVID. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Due to her and her team's efforts, the museum has received positive reviews from both gun and mainstream media, no small feat, and is seen as the premier gun museum in the world that fosters dialogue for a range of diverse audiences. Additionally, if that's not enough, Hlebinsky is a highly sought-after museum consultant, guest speaker, writer, expert witness and in the US and Canada, and a television host and producer. I'm exhausted just reading the things that you spend your life doing. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thanks for having me. This is an interesting way to go about doing it, but I kind of like it because you get some video in it.
Yeah, this is, for years we were Gun Freedom Radio, strictly radio. And so this whole camera thing is, I have to do my hair and makeup every single show. So, I mean, it's just much more labor intensive, but I like it.
I like it too. I'm much more of a visual person, so I love being able to watch videos like this.
Absolutely. So you are a historian who is always leaning into the future and doing something new. So you're kind of on both ends of the spectrum. You've recently left your previous position at Cody Firearms Museum, but you're still very much connected to the museum and have accepted the position of Curator Emerita and Senior Firearms Scholar at the CFM, an honor typically reserved for the end of one's career. I don't think you're at the end of your career. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And second of all, tell us about this position. What does it entail?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because if you're familiar with the academic kind of structure, the university structure, the museum structure, emeritus or emerita, if you're a lady, is something that you usually get, at the end of your career, kind of like a thank you to the work that you've done. And probably about 2 years ago when we got a new CEO at the center, we were in the thick of the renovation, and I started talking to the CEO about the fact that I wanted to have some kind of transition plan. I love my job at the CFM. I wasn't looking to leave the CFM completely, but my consulting business was growing to a point where, I was having to turn away a lot of stuff. And the fact that the little fact that my husband and stepdaughter and dog live in Arizona, also may have played a factor. So we started talking about what's next, for the CFM. And he asked a very kind of poignant question for me. And it was always like, what's the next big thing for the CFM? And I have lots of ideas for where I'd love to see the museum go next. But I didn't have, that groundbreaking CFM renovation type of idea anymore. And so I even kind of thought, I'm like, well, I was brought in to rebuild the museum, to kind of fix you know, a lot of the collections issues, to, you know, fix some relationships that, you know, maybe had gone stale over the decades that we had been open. And I came and I did all that. And I was like, you know what, this really is time for somebody else to bring fresh eyes to the project and kind of continue to move the museum forward. But neither the institution nor myself really wanted to completely sever ties. And so we went back and forth about, you know, is there a way for the curator to be 100% remote? And the answer is no. And so then, you know, we talked about, you know, Emerita, and the late Herbert House was our last curator emeritus. And he was a very, very good friend of mine. And so they said, well, would you be interested in that position? And I was like, of course, because it basically means that I get to do all the fun stuff with no stress.
Yay!
So it is
Ashley,
actually really interesting because for me, I get to focus on a lot of the scholarship that I haven't been able to do, you know, for years because we've been building a museum. I basically took a step back from the day-to-day and get to, you know, work with Danny, who's now our curator. So you'll have to have him on. And
Yes.
basically, you know, help create his vision, help make his vision happen. And then I'm going to be chairing our annual symposium. So I'll still be running that. I'm managing our social media pages because one thing you learn when you become curator is that there is no time to do that. So I'm basically taking some of those types of things off of Danny's plate so that he can manage the grants and budgets and day-to-day and major exhibitions. And so I'm here to help wherever they see fit.
That's
Ashley, you're
awesome.
the only person I know that can be 7 places at one time. You
Oh, and
can.
isn't it ironic that like I moved to Arizona and we're doing this call and I'm in Cody again and you guys are in Arizona?
Yes, yeah. Well, thank goodness we live in the digital age. But when you talked about social media, I don't know if people realize what an exciting moment this is, that the shark suit is right behind you. The one that has featured so prominently in multiple Cody Firearms Museum Instagram posts. So
Oh yeah, my new old office is a train wreck because this is actually full circle. So this is a back office right by the vaults. And it's actually the vault or the office I started in. And we haven't had anyone in it for years. And when they were asking about office space, I was like, can I go back to my old office? So it's kind of a train wreck in here. You can't see what's going on over there. But there's like boxes full of all of the labels from the old museum just stacked up.
it's a perfect visual for exactly how busy you are and how busy the museum is. So I think it's perfect. Plus, shark suit alert.
Yeah.
So you have also begun the important work of defending our constitutional protections with a group called the Firearms Policy Coalition. Talk to us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so this is actually really exciting for me because one of the things I struggled with when I was in graduate school was the fact that like when you're trained to be a historian, you're basically it's almost an impossible task. I mean, you're trying to assemble a bunch of historical information that anyone, you know, could have different perspectives on, and you're never going to have all the information. So you're basically crafting a story based on, you know, your opinion and the evidence that's presented. And that's one thing people don't realize about history. It's not just the facts, please. It's, you know, a lot of opinion and perspective on the information that's presented. And I would always get really frustrated in classes because I'd be like, but what's the point? You know, like why are we doing this? Who's reading this? You know, and you know, and in the grand scheme of things, historians do play a very important role because we write the histories that then get, you know, dissected down for teachers and public educators that then get presented to the public through museums, through classrooms. And so, you know, I always say when sometimes people in our world scoff at academics, you know, they do have a really big part of, you know, writing the history that then gets disseminated to the public. But, you know, it was always kind of like, what's the point? Who's reading this? And, you know, the one cool thing about working in the museum is that you get to educate the public. But a couple of years ago, or maybe no, it was last year, you know, I was approached by one of the law firms working on the Miller v. Becerra case, which is the injunction against the California assault weapons ban. And they asked if I would be willing to write an expert witness testimony on the specific features highlighted within the ban and the historical lineages of them. And so I did, and I'd been doing expert witness testimony for several years at that point. And the one thing about being an expert witness is somebody asks you to do a job and you do the research and you present it kind of, whatever the research shows. And so I worked on that, and Firearms Policy Coalition is one of the companies that's involved in that lawsuit. And so we got to talking about the work they're doing, their kind of Second Amendment scholarship that they're doing. And I kind of started talking about my frustration with the lack of scholarship on firearms and material culture. And they were like, well, would you be willing to come on board as one of our scholars? And basically, my job is a couple-fold. One of them is I get to pick the research topics that I want and do real academic scholarship on those topics and publish in academic presses, and then also on their website and through their channels. But then I'm also there kind of as a guide, a consultant. So if they're working on a policy brief, or anything like that, and they want my historical opinion, they can send it to me and I can review it. All the expert witness testimony is done separately outside of FPC, even if they're involved in it or not. But so I basically get to choose research topics and dive deep into them. And I think one of the first ones I'm going to do now that I'm switched over in my positions with the museum is I really, really want to explore the term assault weapon and where that truly originated, because I kind of have like I've heard some things about it actually originating out of the gun world. And I've discovered some terminology around that in the military context, but I really want to understand this term. It's just like, today it's this term that, is a legislative catch-all, that it basically is applied state, federally, wherever into lawsuits, but it always means something a little bit different. And I want to know where it actually started, so that we can kind of get a better perspective on how it's evolved into where it is today. So I think that'll probably be one of my first big projects, is dissecting that term assault weapon and figuring it out. We know a lot of the legal history behind it, but I kind of want to see if there's any material culture history that predates, the legislation.
Absolutely. I've seen on, social media threads every once in a while, you try to lend your historical voice to that whole, when somebody says, well, it's a completely made up term, it's just completely political. And you're like, and it's like, it is this kind of a nuanced thing. And so I think that for you to spend the time to really take that deep dive, language is so important. We use language to change hearts and minds on either side of any issue. So I am very excited that you're going to be helping all of us to understand that term better.
It's cool. It's a way to apply. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's a way to take my historical background and actually apply it to a real world thing, and that's really the coolest part of working with FPC and doing the expert witness testimonies outside of the organization. It's just, you actually feel like you're doing something rather than just pontificating.
Yeah. Right.
I don't like that word assault or weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, I think neither one of them. We don't have assault weapons at our store. We don't have weapons at our store.
Mm-hmm.
We have firearms, and to me, weapon sounds like a negative that you would use against somebody, not necessarily to defend yourself. I know what the dictionary says, but to me, the word is offensive.
Sounds like you're the aggressor.
Right.
We say we have tools of self-defense, we have tools of hunting, we have tools of sporting, but we just particularly don't care for the word weapon in the retail setting that we have at AZ Firearms. And then, the whole word assault, well, that's a behavior,
right?
Not a thing. So for you to really dig in, we're going to be excited for what you share with us.
Yeah, Ashley. So the museum has several firearms. Has any of your firearms assaulted anybody while they walk through the museum?
Well, I mean, they're kind of lazy, they just hang out on mounts and they chill behind the glass. So not to my knowledge, but it's one of those kind of interesting things that goes on. And as you guys know, since you've been out to the museum, you know, we do, right when you walk into the front of the museum, have terminology. And, you know, personally with the museum, we don't call any of our firearms weapons, because when an artifact comes into a museum, it kind of is a very difficult subject or topic for a lot of people to kind of wrap their heads around, but it ceases to be that thing. You know, it's an artifact, it's meant for preservation. And so, you know, it is not, you know, could one of our firearms be used in a defensive situation or actually go out and be used at the range? Well, of course. But, you know, their purpose is not for that use anymore. And so we're very careful about that. And then we also are careful about the term weapon. You know, as you said, you know, we use the term weapon when it is being used as such. You know, so we try to kind of talk about that as well, you know. And what I do all the time with like the term assault rifle, which is the one where everyone gets even more mad because, you know, it is a definable term, but, you know, a lot of people don't like it because of the assault, you know, part that comes before. And so my answer to people is, you know, okay, you don't have to like the term, but you can't say that it's not a historical term. So you don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with it, and that's fine, but I can define it, you know, better than I can define assault weapon right now, other than as a legislative catch-all term, you know, but I can define it pretty clearly. And so, you know, we can, you know, there's a chance that the term can be altered, you know, at some point to be more precise. But, you know, you don't have to like it. And, you know, I don't necessarily like the term, but, you know, I can trace its lineage historically. And so that's kind of where I come with that whole thing. You know, and it's funny too, because I think sometimes I'm so engrossed in history and like all the different terms that like I don't even notice those debates going on. And so like I'll say, you know, the term assault rifle, and that means, you know, a single soldier portable select fire, you know, detachable magazine, intermediate cartridge. Like I'll start defining all those things, and then all of a sudden people will get really mad at me on social media, and I'm like, whoa, what did I miss? You know, sometimes I feel like I miss the like current cultural like connotations with that. You know, because I just didn't even, like, I broke the internet on recoil like years ago because I did a play on words. I had a Sturmgewehr and I had the Burton like machine rifle, which was developed in the 19-teens, 17, 18. And it technically falls under the definition of an assault rifle, never put into production. And so we were just joking. I was like, well, today I'm going to talk about one of the first. And I like skip over the Sturmgewehr and I pick up the Burton. And it was just a shtick. Like I didn't mean anything by it. And like one of the recoil editors like shared my thing and was like, today I learned people don't know the difference between an assault weapon and an assault rifle in the gun world. And like people were just like going nuts. And it was kind of funny because people were thinking I was saying assault weapon when I was not. And so then like people were defending me and defining assault rifle. And then some people were like, ah. I mean, it was just like, and I had no idea. Like I was just working my day. And then I look and there's like 200 comments and I'm like, what have I done? I just thought I was being funny. I guess not.
You can, nowadays, you can break the internet by finger placement, right? If you have good finger discipline, trigger discipline. So, you know, people, and I love that there's that passion. I'm excited that people care enough.
Everybody
but
wants
at
to fix
some
everybody,
point,
don't they?
yes, at some point it's like, okay, take a breath and go back
it's like
to
what
the
I said
point of what you were making.
Yeah, it's like what I said on social media last week is like the debate is awesome. You know, the passion is awesome, but we just kind of have to stop eating our own.
Yes. Oh, amen to that.
Right.
Well, so
I have a shark back here for the
yes. Because you're like, I win. I'm the shark. So, so that all this kind of leads me into the next question. So you can't, you know, divorce the topic of firearms in the United States from the Second Amendment, which of course is in our Bill of Rights. And so our Bill of Rights is a wholly apolitical, non-political document. But in our current times, any mention of the Second Amendment causes people to run to their political corners. As we were just saying, you know, everybody's got a passionate opinion. So how does an academic, you just are trying to talk about the history of things. How do you do the work you do concerning firearms and stay out of that mire?
Yeah. So if I were putting my like ivory hat on as an academic, you know, I would actually say and challenge the, you know, assertion that the Bill of Rights is apolitical just because it's written by people in a time in history. So there's always politics that plays into all of that stuff. But you're right, in today's society, this kind of debate is so, engorged. And one of the things that I always say is I used to do a lecture series called Displaying the Politically Incorrect. Not because I thought firearms were politically incorrect, but like mainstream society, often brings that connotation to it. And so, one of the things that I'm now currently doing, because I'm working so much with FPC and I'm just starting to do some work with George Moxery, who's a law professor at the University of Wyoming, very, very well published, is I'm actually trying to really start to understand the nuance in the Second Amendment debate. That's not something as a material culture person I've ever really looked into. It's one of those things that exists in our world and is a part of our history and is incredibly important. But the actual, I went to a symposium years ago. It was a liberal think tank called the Aspen Institute. And it was a great, oh my gosh. It was a great symposium, and from that is where it was inspired my symposium series that Danny and I do, and and it was on firearms and common law, and that was both the U.S. Constitution, but it was also the English Bill of Rights, because there's this argument that there is wording within the English Bill of Rights that allows for firearms, and there's a debate whether that wording actually means that or not. But there's been some Canadian gun rights groups that have tried to play into that wording, because they are still a part of the Crown. And so I'm sitting there and I am watching these people on both sides of the Second Amendment debate, on both sides of this English Bill of Rights debate. And I remember I texted my old boss at the Smithsonian who was in the room, and I'm like, do you know what's happening right now? And he's like, no, I have no idea. I mean, it's such a fierce debate, and people build their academic careers on fighting about commas and certain, and one word meanings. And one of the things you learn in history as when you're learning to be a historian is that, words always mean something different. Back then, with the mindset that they were in, the culture of their time, it means something. And that's where you get some of the fiery debate that you get today, where you'll say, the founders meant everything, and therefore, machine guns, all that concept. And then people will be like, no, they couldn't have conceived of that. And that's where that debate starts to spiral, because there is an awareness that a historical document is, a piece of its time, a product of its time. And so, and that's why you get all the courts and the stuff, that fight it all. But that's kind of that mentality, and the two sides somehow filters down, to everybody else. And it's continued to be debated. And so I'm currently reading as much Second Amendment scholarship as I can, both from people like David Koppel, George Moxery, but I'm also looking at people that put out scholarship from the Duke Firearms Law Center. So I'm trying to get both perspectives to see where everyone's coming from on that very, very nuanced debate. We'll see, what type of Second Amendment scholar I truly become when I'm done. But it is interesting. And so the way that, I try to deal with the debate and, where people are coming from, is that I look at, take a topic today. I guess I'll do one of my favorite topics. It's an article coming out of Recoil, is feminism. Okay. And you're familiar with this, with the DC project, what I said at our rally last year. So feminism today is, it's always different, but, a lot of times today, modern day feminists would, they really don't like the idea of women carrying firearms. They think it puts them at more risk. They throw out the stats and all that stuff. And so they scoff at the idea of women carrying guns. On the other side, female gun owners, see firearms as the ultimate, example of being able to defend and protect themselves. And so when I hear those two sides, I look at, okay, well, where's that coming from? So my job is not necessarily to publicly make a declaration one way or the other on that debate. It's to listen to the debate. I have my own personal opinions. I carry a gun, so that's probably, hints at that.
Right.
But, I
alert.
both sides. And, and I try to figure out the kind of point where that all comes together. And where a lot of that comes together, one of the first points in if you're going backwards in history, is the second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s, where you have, this is the sexual revolution. And one of the biggest topics of that era was, how do you protect yourself from rape? How do you topple the patriarchy? How do we get, equal rights. And so there's a fracture in that feminist movement. And there are the feminists that want to work within the structure, of the government. And then there are these armed feminists that are, I in the article I say, at the same time when gun manufacturers are, taking pictures of women without their clothes off, or with their clothes off with guns, and women are taking their clothes off for guns, there are women, seeking to ignite the sexual revolution with them. And so, like, you've got this fracturing there, and there are these they're leftist feminists. And, they're creating underground pamphlets, and it's really good information. Like, it's great. I mean, definitely look at this article when it comes out, because we've got, pictures of the pamphlets that I own, and they're really trying to teach people about responsible gun ownership. And so these feminists have pictures and diagrams of firearms and the parts, and they have, firearm safety. And then they go to the point of like saying, and these are like a bunch of firearms that are available, and these are the pros and cons of them, and this is how much they cost. And then they even go to the point of, okay, so now you're carrying a gun, and what are the laws? Because they too are very frustrated with, I don't want to defend myself and then go to jail. And one of the big people they always put up is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but Inez Garcia, who was raped. And she went to her rapists and killed them. And shot them. She went to jail, and then a feminist attorney, got her an appeal, and was saying that the mindset that she was in, was able to prove that she was still in that mindset of being raped and in fear. And so they talk about her in some of those pamphlets because they saw firearms as, and they use the term, the great equalizer. And so do a lot of armed female African-American civil rights activists as well. And so it's interesting to me. So basically, I go back in history and I try to find that moment of connection between the really seemingly opposing forces, and try to say, hey guys, like, let's look at this, and where did this change, and how can we understand each other better at this moment in history, and understand and respect that our four sisters maybe thought similar. And so I do that with pretty much everything I can in the modern gun debate, is I find those key points in history where we start talking about them differently, we start acting differently, and we start disagreeing. Because I think that there's a lot of points of unity that a lot of people who are disagreeing today don't realize that they have in common. And if we could start to understand that there's things that we have in common with people, maybe something can change and be better.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm naive, but whatever. I'm retired. I can do what I want.
I love it. Oh, I thought you had a question,
Nope.
Dan.
You guys are doing a great job. I could just stand here and learn.
You could just cheer us on. I love it. So finding those key points where things converge, that is so important, just like taking the etymology of a word, and it's like, okay, so all of a sudden it shifted somehow culturally, or it shifted somehow in a legal document or something. That is really where the meat is. And kind of leads us into the next question, because as a historian, you are likely watching this particular time in world history with a different lens than the average person. How do you foresee this bizarre world of 2020 as we're sitting in our studio on Monday, July 13th of 2020? With the pandemic, we've had demonstrations that turned into riots. How do you see all this being integrated into the work that museums do in capturing history without commenting on history?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting conversation right now. And the museum field is really trying to figure out what their role is. A large portion of the museum field is kind of moving towards the fact that, it's a hashtag, museums are not neutral. And I wrote an article in an academic forum that says, I want museums to be as neutral as possible. I don't think that it is necessarily our job to make that kind of commentary. But so I differ. Danny makes a joke that says, everyone wants, museums to not be neutral until a firearms museum posts hashtag repeal the NFA, and then all of a sudden we should be neutral again. But I believe very strongly that, I mean, neutrality is impossible completely, obviously. But I believe very strongly when you have hot button issues like firearms, being as neutral as possible allows an opportunity for people to learn from all perspectives and then have conversation. And so maybe there are some areas where you don't want, you do want non-neutrality to kind of, talk about a certain thing. But I think when something is already so, up for debate and so emotional in people's minds that it's almost like they go to a museum and they're like, I don't want, to be bombarded by all of that. And so one of the things that we've been trying to really kind of understand in the museum world is what is our role as curator? Are we, the people that put out the information, or do we allow, other cultures to also provide feedback? So for example, here at the center, we have a Plains Indian Museum. Well, we also have a Western Art Museum. And, one of the topics that's been discussed is, okay, so a lot of times depictions of Western art can be a little offensive, if I'm being polite, especially of Native peoples, and so we've talked about, like, we have a bunch of last stand types of imagery, and would it be interesting, worthwhile, to have your traditional museum label, about that work of art, what it is, and then bring somebody in from the historical field that's Native, to also write a label about, their perspective on the same painting, to kind of show people that you can look at the same thing and see a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And so there's been kind of that conversation of opening up, the door for new voices. One thing that we kind of see, especially with what's going on with a lot of the protests and the riots, is, these are things that we've seen throughout history, happen. And it's kind of interesting because I also then see those histories get appropriated by various sides for rhetoric, which is always fascinating to me. But, I think about the mob rule in New Orleans and during the post-Civil War period, which was white rioting. And then you think about, the bombing of Black Wall Street, which came up in a lot of, those conversations and have been politicized since. But I try to find those moments in history where there are those, like I said, with the feminist part, is I try to find those points in history where there is similarity to try to make sense of, where we are today. I tend to reserve my, public opinions of things that are going on today to kind of see how everything plays out, because it's more of a looking back to make sure, because you don't have all the information when you're in it, and you're especially, attached to it and emotional with it. So we try to find, where is this, anger, and where is, this kind of problem, stemming from, and where in history, can we look to that to see if there are similarities, if there's things that we can learn from that, all of those different things. And so we try to do that as much as possible. And then with the pandemic, I haven't had time to do this, but Danny and I did a video about, we did a podcast on, like, end of times, major world, like, wars, when people do start to accumulate firearms, out of, fear and necessity, all of those things. And so I want to know, and I hadn't looked into this, so anybody knows, like, did a lot of people buy guns during the, like, the Spanish flu, like, I want to know. So, like, we do a lot with, the history of firearms and legislation in this country, which as a result, we tend to know a lot about, a lot of the kind of race politics that goes on, because a lot of early gun legislation was, a part of race politics, to keep firearms out of the hands of, African Americans, Native peoples, rural, poor whites, and so we get into that. We haven't really looked too much into pandemics and the relationship with firearms and that. So I'd really be interested to know kind of if this is a kind of thing that happens. You see it with world wars. You see governments doing it, especially when the war starts, the kind of amassing and amping up of production, obviously out of necessity. And so, it's one of those things that I don't know too much about that one, so I can't, predict anything. But, there are key moments in history that can lead you to try to understand where people are coming from and how people are feeling about something that is so emotional for everyone involved. So it's been kind of interesting. And as a side anecdote, we've been experiencing this summer a little bit of something that we didn't anticipate. And it's one of those culture of the time types of things. So that we've got the Time magazine mural. in our museum. And if you're not familiar with that, it was made years ago. And it is a mural that depicts 250 people equally across the gun debate. And our own DC project leader, Di Lydorf Muller, and she's the one that actually got it out here because she was the pro-gun spokesperson for it. And I remember doing research on it when we were putting the mural in because, yes, there are a lot of people in there that, show politics and that kind of thing. But, when I was looking at it, it was one of those things that I saw across the board. Pro-gun people and, pro-gun control people alike were very happy with the way that they were represented. And that doesn't happen very often, especially for the pro-gun community. And I was so proud of that. So we put the mural up and, obviously you're going to get some people that look at it super fast and be like,
why is that person on there?
I don't like this, it's anti-gun. And it's like, no, it's actually an equal representation when you stop and look at it. Wow. The thing that we're getting this summer is the fact that there are two groups of BLM people in that mural. And what I found most fascinating before all of the recent things was the fact that there's two groups of Black Lives Matter people on there, both holding one's I think got a shirt that says Black Lives Matter, one's holding a sign. And I don't know, I haven't listened to all of the stories, but from a visual perspective, the one group is not holding firearms and the other group is holding firearms. And I thought that was really interesting. But because of everything going on right now, people are looking at the sign and thinking it's a Black Lives Matter mural. And rather angrily approaching Danny about, our, posting, putting up something like that, which we put up years ago, and it equally shows people. And so, it does kind of start, bringing up the conversation of, how quickly culture shifts, and people's attitudes shift and change. But at the same time, it's an amazing mural to spark debate. And that was one of the things that we wanted. We didn't anticipate, the debate that's being, discussed right now with it, but it shows you how difficult it can be for museums to try to, ignite a conversation. And then, the culture changes so rapidly that then all of a sudden it's a different conversation. And is it the conversation, you want to facilitate in your museum or not? And so that's been something we've been kind of like, looking at. And every conversation that we've had with people has been really good when you actually kind of dissect it for them and understand it. But it's interesting to see the gut reaction from our visitors. And we get visitors from all around the world. So it's all kinds of reactions, so that's been really, really interesting.
Well, then I would say that is, from my perspective, that's one of your most successful displays, because that's what you want. You want to cause people to think, you want to cause people to discuss, and maybe, I always say, like, if you're listening to this show and there's something you disagree with, that's amazing, because now you're thinking about it, and you're probably going to go to the Google machine and spend some time researching to prove me wrong. Good. Yeah. Amazing. That's what we want in the world, right?
Well, I'm going to turn your mic off for a second.
Oh, no.
Turn your mic off.
Okay.
Ashley, so you've been a television host and a producer. Do you have any new plans for anything coming up?
So yes and no. I'm working on a show right now that I can't really say much about. It's I'm not on it.
You can tell us.
Oh with a little recording symbol.
I
like my NDAs where they are. So I am producing a show right now. It's not. I'm not the host or anything, which is actually very exciting for me. And it's actually not a firearm show. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
And so I'm working on that, but I had and then gun stories, obviously. I'm always, doing stuff with gun stories. But the COVID-19 has caused quite the kind of halt on, the filming process. I'm not sure if you guys saw, I was on Rob Riggle's show last season, so I'm hoping they get another season because I'll be on it again. I had a bunch of stuff in the works, and then COVID kind of went. But I mean, it looks like it's firing back up, because even like 2 days ago, I had a DM about something moving forward. And so in terms of hosting right now, nothing super in the works, had some stuff before. And so hopefully it'll surface back up. But honestly, the nature of TV is so interesting to me, because it's literally like, just when you think you're out, you get a DM on your social media and it draws you back in. But when I was a kid, I acted a lot. You know, I did a lot of professional theater, and I never like thought in the million years that I would get back to this world, because it made my tummy hurt like a lot, and like it still does. And I really, like, the other day, Mark, my husband Mark, was like, "Oh, here's gun stories," and like I was like, I like gave him like the death stare, and I was like, "No, we are relaxing right now, and I do not want to see myself on camera, okay?" You know, and he was like, "All right, I'll watch it when you're not here." So I still get really nervous about, you know, being on camera and stuff. But I loved, one thing I started getting into towards the end of my like teenage acting career was the fact that I started directing, and I started doing a lot of like behind the scenes work. And so I was one of the consulting producers on Brothers in Arms, which was on History Channel, and it was a very minimal role. I just basically threw them information, and they could do what they will with it. Well, this show is the same group of people that did Master of Arms. And so I've had a really, you know, instrumental role with content. And so it's just so much fun to like create content and then see it come out of somebody else's mouth. I think it's cool. And so I'm excited to be doing more behind the camera, and maybe getting some more historically accurate information out there. A girl can
That's
dream.
awesome.
But yeah, so I'm working on it. And oh, I forgot to mention when you asked about Firearms Policy Coalition, but I am going to be doing a video series for them. So that'll be in front of the camera, just online. That's basically what we've been talking about, taking something that's contemporary in our, you know, current debate and dissecting the historical origins of that topic to help people have a little bit more information when they, you know, go to debate it with their friends or enemies, or if they're taking it to a court, you know, of law. I'm going to try to dissect a lot of what we're talking about comes from.
I absolutely love that. And, you know, when you said you were younger and you did some acting, I also happen to know that you did some ballroom dancing.
Oh, yes.
Are you still doing that?
Yes, I am. That is one of my plans. I have a dance instructor in Arizona, and I've been taking lessons on and off. I'm very out of shape. On and off.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
do they still have ballrooms?
No. I've seen pictures of you. You are so not out of shape. Now, if you're talking just muscular and the stamina
like,
that it takes.
My chiropractor the other day had to do something with my leg, and I was like, oh no, I've got to start stretching again. But no, so I actually do want to go back to ballroom. I don't know how seriously and how in depth I'll get going back. It all just depends. But you know, I stepped in a hole like in October, and I jacked my ankle up pretty bad. And then COVID-19 happened, and so, you know, no one was doing anything. So I'm hoping now that I moved to Arizona that I can do some ballroom dancing and maybe go back to competing. I don't know. I always say, like, I don't want to get back in the drama of all the, you know, competitions, but at the same time, I can't just do anything halfway. No. So I will probably be competing again within the next year or so.
And I mean, to have something that's so completely different from the rest of your work, I think is so good for your brain. You know, it gives your brain a completely different mode to run in for a while.
Yeah, I display machine guns, and then I also ballroom dance.
Yeah.
Sort of like...
You don't ballroom dance. I would love it if you would, but what were you going to say, Ashley?
Oh, yeah, it is really funny because a lot of people, you know, guns are their passion, their hobby. And like, obviously I'm very passionate about firearms history and firearms. You know, everyone always goes, when are you going to get into competitive shooting? And my answer is like, never.
Yeah.
That's what my husband does. You know, that's his thing. And
Mark Hainish, by the way.
Yes, and I would not insult competitive shooters by like coming into the sport, because I'm pretty sure I would be terrible. But part of the nature of, you know, the shooting sport sometimes is that like I'm a girl and I don't look too terrible, so I feel like I would get sponsored, and then I would be like, and that would just be like insulting the entire sport, because I do not deserve that in any way, shape, or form. So like for me, I actually, like a lot of people, they go to a firearms museum for their fun. And for me, it's ballroom dancing. And I'm really obsessed with like dark tourism, why people go to sites of mourning, battlefields, really creepy, macabre places. I'm like, I used to be a ghost hunter. So like, I'm super into like weird, creepy stories. And so my so you guys, while you guys are visiting, you know, the gun museum, I'm off at like Zach Baggins's haunted museum looking at weird stuff.
Why
You
can't
know,
you
so
do
it's kind
that?
of funny. Like as much as I love firearms and they're like very much a part of my life, you know, my hobbies are totally different. Whereas people that maybe don't work in the gun field, you know, their hobbies firearms and they're passionate about that and they want to go to every single thing they possibly can, firearms and museums and history related. And for me, you know, as much as I love it, it's still work. You know,
Yeah.
still a tax
So-
write-off,
for
but
sure.
So
I do.
Ashley, after the show's over, Cheryl's going to ask you how to get me involved in ballroom dancing, but I'm going to ask you on the air, how do I get her involved in going to these haunted mansions and stuff like that? She won't do it.
I'm a ninny.
I love it. She won't. do it.
Oh, okay. So here's the reality, Cheryl. So I love a good ghost story, like more than anybody. Okay, my husband and I stay at every haunted place we possibly can, and nothing has ever happened. I was like a part of this ghost hunting thing in Fort Delaware for like 3 years. Nothing ever happened, but it's still cool to run around a fort at night. So the reality of the matter is, one, it's good to go with somebody else. It's
Yes.
also good to have a skeptic in the room because they can lighten the situation. And
Yes.
3, like the likelihood, I'm sorry for all you lovers of ghosts and have actual firsthand ghost accounts or stories. Apparently ghosts don't like me because they don't come out for me. The likelihood something's actually going to happen is slim to none. So
Right.
there you go.
I tried to-
Watch, now you're going to go to Jerome or something and something's going to happen and you're going to be like, Ashley.
Exactly. I was like, you know how a cat can sense who is allergic to cats, and that cat spends all of its time, you know, on that person. That's what ghosts would do to me. They'd be like, "Hey,
I have tried.
it's one of those scaredy cats. You know, one of those
Yeah.
scared people. Let's go."
We've been going to Halloween horrors for, I don't know, maybe 7 years now, and she won't go. And it's
No,
like,
that's
come
at
on,
Universal
on,
Studios. It's
just-
all just
Oh my
for
gosh,
fun,
it's
and
so
I
much
still
fun.
won't.
It
I
is.
still
You know
won't
what?
do it.
I will actually defend Cheryl on this one because if you are, so like if you go to a haunted house, you know, okay, I'm going to be scared, you know, shitless, I'm not allowed to swear, like
Okay.
from start to finish. But when I leave, I'm fine. But
Yes.
with the Universal and all the theme parks, there are people scaring you all the time.
Yes.
And so
yes.
there is no escape from that. So I would
Yes.
start her with something that's like a start to finish haunted house so that she knows, you know, here's my safe space before I go in. Here's my safe space when I leave. I also worked in haunted houses in high school. You know, but like if you go to those places, you're 100% immersed. But the trick though, if you do get dragged to one, is like don't react. If you don't react, they leave you alone. They may get up in your face, and if you're just like, because like I look like the type of person that would react, and I don't just because I worked in haunted houses, you know. So they literally are like, "Blah," and if
You're
just
no
like,
fun.
they're just like,
Ashley.
never mind.
Ashley, this is how far I can get with Cheryl. Boo. That's it.
No.
That's it.
I love them, but they're not for everybody. I love a good scare. Like I don't even
Yes.
know. Maybe I'm like just sick. I'm messed up in the
My
head.
brother-in-law and I are really nervous that they're not going to have it this year. But we go to Knott's Berry Scary Farm and to Halloween Horrors, and we love it. It's we wait all year for that. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh
All
my
right.
gosh, I love them. Love
Well,
them.
we've got to wrap. We got to go. Let you get back to wearing all the gajillion hats that you wear. And on that topic, could you just tell folks how do they follow all of the things
What do
that
you
you
mean?
do?
How do you follow Ashley? All you do is turn the corner. There she is.
Boom! There she is again.
I don't know what I'm doing standing on a street corner, Dan. But
Well, there is that.
I didn't say street.
Really bad characterization, Dan.
But yeah, okay, so if you want to know what's going on with the Cody Firearms Museum, I'm actually running the social media. So we're Cody Firearms on Twitter, and then we're Cody Firearms Museum on Facebook and Instagram. Danny is still running the Reddit page because I scared. But we
Tell
do
us
have a
Danny's
Reddit-
last name.
Danny Michael.
Danny Michael.
He does chat up on all the gun subreddits, and it's always fun. And then if you're interested in what's going on with me, I have to remember, I'm at Gun Curator on Instagram, at official Ashley Hlebinsky on Facebook, and then I'm just Ashley Hlebinsky on Twitter, but like don't follow my Twitter because I hate Twitter and I don't post.
I love it. Well, and we even named this episode The Gun Code, which is one of your websites, and never even got to that. So people are going to have to tune in next time we have you on to learn more about
Because I have
that.
to update that website. It's old.
Yeah, well, you know, in your spare time.
Yeah.
In your spare time, you can work on that because you have none.
Yeah.
So, All right, lady, you are amazing. Thank you so much for all you do. We so appreciate you taking so much time to be with us today. And we will be following you, just not on Twitter. We're going to take your advice on Twitter. Nobody needs to go to that dumpster
She's probably
fire.
standing at her front door right now.
Dumpster fire is a great classification of Twitter. I hate Twitter.
For sure. All right. Thanks again
Thanks,
so
Ashley.
much. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
She's got a lot of fire. I'm telling you seriously, everywhere you go, there's Ashley.
It's true. She is such a go-getter, such a busy person, and her work is so purposeful.
Right.
And I love that. It inspires me to, just to do more, to be more effective. I love it.
I'm going to talk to her about maybe making the Cody Museum a haunted museum on Halloween.
Ooh.
That would be so
That would be
awesome.
fun.
It'd be scary, wouldn't it?
It would. Surely they've thought of that because, I mean, if she loves ghosty things and she's the curator, but you should definitely drop that idea in her
I'd
in
do a
her
Cody
ear
for
the
that.
next time.
You know, that museum, I hadn't been to it until about 3 years ago. It was the first time we went.
Mhm.
We were invited
For
to,
the symposium.
yes.
It was
And
awesome.
I'll tell you, I have never seen a more beautiful museum.
Really well done. And then with the update, we been there since the update?
Yes.
We did
Yes,
go
we
for the
did.
update.
Yep.
That's right. That's right. Because then we did get to see the Time magazine
Yep.
display, and
You know,
man, it's just
and-
incredible because they do pull culture, modern culture. It's not just like some old mothbally, dusty old
No,
place.
it's super amazing. I think there's 3 museums in there.
Mhm.
But
Something like that.
for all you guys that's never been to the museum and want to go, just keep in mind when they take something out of the museum, it's not in the trash can. I looked, so you can't.
True story. Okay, we got to get out of here.
Where we're going?
We've got actually, because it's Monday and we do our interviews on Mondays, you guys are probably catching on to that by now. We have another interview waiting in the wings. That
So
you
maybe
will
we
get
should
to
do
see
some thanking.
next time.
Maybe we should do some thanking and stuff.
We should thank our awesome listeners. You guys are really where the rubber meets the road. Thank you for spending your time with us.
How about our
means
guests?
everything. Thank you to our amazing guest, Ashley Hlebinsky, who wears a gajillion hats. But definitely the ones that she wears in the Cody Firearms Museum world are really groundbreaking, honestly,
Yes.
for a young female person. I just truly awesome. I think history is going to look very well on the work that she has been able to accomplish.
Right. I would say, I've never been to the museum before her,
Mhm.
but when you walk in the door, you can describe it as energy. The whole
Oh,
museum
I love
is
that.
just packed full of energy.
I love that. All right. Well, until next time, pray for our nation. Do it. Don't say you're going to do it. Do it.
Just do it now. Do it right now. Just
Pray for our leaders.
all of them.
All of them, Dan. Even the ones you don't like.
Okay.
Especially the ones you don't like. Be good to each other. Have a great week, and God bless.